Good evening, Lake Orion. Welcome to History Now here on ONTV. I'm your host, Anthony Taormina, and I got a very special guest with me. I got my friend Saygan Habsburg with me. Saygan, how are you?
I'm doing great, Anthony. It's nice to see you again.
It's nice to see you. I wanted to bring you on because you got a very unique history about Romania during World War II.
That I do. My grandfather grew up there with my great-grandmother during World War II. A little bit in Austria, but mostly in Romania, and their experience with both the German government and the Soviet, and being basically stuck in the middle between two very large powers.
Almost very similar to Hungary, where they were kind of caught in the Calderon, or caught in the middle between two very, very strong superpowers at that time, which was the Nazis and the Soviets. So I want to talk to you about, let's introduce about Romania. Romania was an ally of Great Britain and France during World War I. They fought in World War I. They were part of the victorious powers. But in World War II, they were kind of allied with the Germans. But it was not that way at first.
No, King Carroll wanted to remain neutral. And then they did eventually, almost in a sense out of necessity, become allied with Germany and the Axis powers. Until 1944, during the coup of King Michael, and it flopped around quite a bit. So
I mean, going into World War II, there was obviously a lot of fear of the Soviet Union, and there was obviously, you had Germany to the west, and then you had the Soviet Union to the east. And you have Romania right there. You have Hungary, who was allied with Germany. So it was a very, very tough spot for Romania. Romania had gained a lot of territory following World War I, and they were looking to expand without having to go to war. So Romania, in a way, were they trying to play both sides, or were they supporting?
You know, with a lot of countries, their own interest, I think, came first in a lot of situations.
Yes.
Especially, at that time, you don't have as much information being thrown at you like, today we have the internet.
Right.
So there's only so much that they know about, what's going on hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So their own interest came first. Their own people came first. That was priority number one.
Right.
And then they could make decisions based off of, through there. But even being neutral is a precarious situation because no one wants you to remain neutral. They want you on their side. And so they will either entice you through gifts or by trading, or they will punish you and bomb your people.
Right.
So being neutral is not, as easy as saying, all right, you guys have at it, I'll just enjoy my coffee over here.
Prior to World War II, or prior to the Nazi invasion of Poland and the Nazi-Soviet Pact, we may mention Romania was allied with Great Britain and France. Both of them relied on Romania, particularly for oil, the Palesti oil fields.
Yes.
Can you talk to me about King Carroll's relationship with Great Britain and France before the war?
When it comes to the the royal families in general, a lot of them were related to each other. Like, there's a lot of families spread out through, a lot of territory was gained in royal families through marriage instead of through war. They found it to be much more profitable that way. So they're going to, try to remain with their families. And Carroll did have a close relationship with the English family.
Right.
Queen Marie was, who was my great-great-grandmother, was the great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria.
Wow.
So it's all very connected through there. So you don't really want to go to war with your own family if you don't have to. So they're going to try and work out more trade routes that way and whatever, which comes back down to the profitability of gaining territories through marriage.
What was King Carroll's reaction to the Nazi-Soviet Pact of August of 1939?
I honestly am not too familiar with his, actual
Right.
reaction to that. I do know that he wanted to keep Romania neutral
Right.
during that time until his exile.
Right. And then let's make mention of when we made mention of Romania wanted to remain neutral when the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939. Romania did have a relationship with Poland, but Romania chose not to intervene. They felt that it was a wonder why they chose not to intervene. Just wanted to stay neutral.
Remaining neutral, see, again, it comes back down to the best interest of Romania, its economic interest, its people's interest. So, soldiers aren't as expendable. You don't
Right.
lose one and then just get another. Your fighting force is finite.
Right.
So to go to the defense of such a country when there's not just a war there, they have other allies. Or you can't spread yourself too thin. You have to protect yourself
Right.
as well. So, and you touched on the oil fields, which
Yes.
were a huge commodity.
Yes.
Everybody wanted a piece of that. So that became Romania's bargaining chip.
Right.
For, okay, we can let you in here to get some oil, but don't hurt us.
Right.
You have this massive force, and we're this tiny country, so it's a really scary situation to be in when you're up against a huge power like the Nazis and the Third Reich, or
Right.
against the Soviet Union.
Right. But also, Romania was also having to contend with Hungarian expansion as well. That was a big rivalry between Romania and Hungary. Both of them were competing with each other for relations. Both were competing with each other for land, particularly Transylvania.
Yep.
What's your take about Transylvania in general?
I know it went back and forth at quite a bit. I'm not entirely sure about why that particular area was so sought after. I do remember my great-grandmother talking about her losing her holdings through there. Did put a damper on her, financially, as well as
Right.
being able to support those people and what have you.
There was a lot of Romanian-speaking inhabitants from Romania who were living in Transylvania that were Romanian, that felt Romanian, but there was also a lot of Transylvanians that felt Hungarian. So that caused a lot of bitterness between the two countries, and they ended up competing with each other over Transylvania, and Hitler and Mussolini both wanted them both as allies. So they both, but they were both intimidated by Hitler especially, so they sought an intervention called the Second Vienna Award. But at the same time, you made mention, Hitler wanted to do business with Romania over the oil fields. And so they both sought intervention over the Second Vienna Awards, and the deal ended up being Hungary would acquire northern Transylvania, including land that originally was majority of Romania. And Romania ended up acquiring the southern part, and it caused a lot of bitterness within Romania, and I guess King Carroll ended up fainting when he found out the final agreement.
I didn't know that. That's
Yeah, and there was a lot of anger towards King Carroll from the Romanian people, and it played a role in causing him to abdicate in 1940. What happened? What caused King Carroll to abdicate in 1940?
King Carroll was under a lot of pressure from so many different sides, and there's a lot of people, you mentioned that a lot of people were angry with him. They felt like he was unfit to govern, and I believe he just pretty much collapsed under pressure, and it's like, all right, fine, I'm out. He ran off with his mistress and left his I believe his nephew, King Michael.
Yep, King Michael.
Who was only
yep.
19 years old as king of this war-torn country. And the people were very, very nervous about having such, basically a child, in charge. And it created almost basically a power vacuum
Yep.
because everyone wanted to influence this kid. And so there's a lot of push-pull that happened while King Michael is trying to get his feet on the ground in his new position as the leader of this country, and he's being pulled in 10 different directions. So it created quite a bit of instability in the Romanian morale, as well as the government, economically, and it had a whole trickle-down effect.
Right. There was an issue, I guess, with the Iron Guard, I believe it was, in Romania. There was kind of that power vacuum where they ended up. It was a far-right group that was supporting Hitler and the Nazis, and there was a far right, and it caused a lot of. There was a lot of fear about that happening in Romania, where a far right group was going to take over in Romania, and eventually, Ion Antonescu would take power as the prime minister or the conductor of Romania. I know it's a very hard subject to talk about.
Antonescu's a little touchy.
I know. But can you talk about Antonescu a little bit and what he did without getting a little bit emotional, understandably?
I'm just reference my notes here real quick.
No worries.
Yeah, Antonescu was, oh boy.
He was
a force, and he tore through not just like King Michael's stand, but through everyone, and everyone was just terrified of this guy, who basically had almost a Hitler-like following with his far-right nationalism and all this, and Romania itself was not, while it remained neutral, it is also responsible for the death of, I believe, over 1 million Jews on its own. It's
the Odessa tragedy.
And Antonescu really pushed for a lot of policies and a lot of relationships that put Romania even in a more precarious, place in the balance of the wars.
He sought relations, better relations with the Nazis, with Hitler especially. You made mention about the oil fields being a major bargaining chip. Hitler wanted oil.
Yeah.
And Romania ended up becoming one of Germany's biggest trading partners because Germany wanted oil. But also,
Antonescu allowed Germany to move in.
Yeah.
So 500,000 troops, half a million Germans moved in.
But also, Hitler was looking to invade the Soviet Union. And he needed Romania as an ally because Romania borders the Soviet Union. So
became like an anchor base to move into that. Yeah.
Was Romania desperate for an alliance with Germany because they feared the Soviet Union?
They feared the Soviet Union more than they feared Germany. I know in between all of this, there was a lot of desperate pleas to Great Britain during this time. And while they understood that Churchill was under a lot of pressure, to put it lightly, Britain was like, we would like to help you, but we can't, because they're barely able to defend their own borders at this point. And they really didn't want an alliance with either. King Michael didn't like either of them. But it was like the lesser of the two evils, basically. So the Germans, while they moved in, they were much more respectful, if you will, to people's way of life, except for the Jews.
Right. I mean, it's a little bit more. It's touchy because it wasn't always that Germany wasn't always the nicest to foreigner, or wasn't always the nicest to foreigners, because I did a couple of reports myself on them.
Yeah, but at the same time, the Soviets were much more indiscriminate. and they would just barrel through with they'd put whatever you
Right.
had that they wanted.
Right.
They'd just come up, put a gun to your head and say, give
Right.
it to me. And so the normal villagers didn't have to worry about that as much with the Germans.
Right.
So that's really what it came down to. It was one or the other. So it was kind of like get annihilated or get partially annihilated.
Right. There was no winning. It was no winning scenario.
It was a no win-win.
But also, if I remember, Germany promised Romania. If they promised Romania some territory in the Soviet Union as well, Transnistria, I believe it was called. They also, because as a result, to try to compensate the loss for Transylvania. So, so that kind of appeased Antonescu as well. So, did King Michael, did he stay out of Romanian affairs during 1940 up until the coup?
He was more or less forced to. Antonescu kind of drove him out. And so he had to leave the country and rebuild alliances and prove himself as a leader. Because, he was thrown into being king at 19 years old. He didn't really have the time to develop relationships with anyone before everyone swooped into this power vacuum for their own wants and needs, or what they felt was best. So King Michael had to basically run away to an extent, not because he didn't want to take care of his people, but because he couldn't. He was run out. So as he built up more alliances and was able to connect with the people, in 1944 he did overthrow Antonescu with his coup.
Yes.
Which was successful for a while.
We'll get into that.
Yeah, that was only temporary.
Yes. I want to go back to 1941. At this point, Operation Barbarossa, Romania joins Germany in the invasion of the USSR. They got back Bessarabia, which they lost in 1940 to the Soviets, and they also got Transnistria, and also during that time, Romania was able to occupy a lot of the Soviet Union, they occupied Odessa, that whole area. How was Romania as an occupying power in the Soviet Union?
As I touched on earlier, that Romanian troops were responsible for over it's estimated 1 million or more deaths of the Jewish people, and it's definitely a black mark on our history.
Yes.
But it's from what I understand, they were not the most ruthless of them all.
Right.
But they also weren't like the best either. They didn't come as peacekeepers.
Right.
By any means. So
Right.
they came to gain this territory. It was war.
Yes.
So it was ugly, and it's ugly truth of it.
Romania would occupy this area until 1943 with the Battle of Stalingrad, which Romania ended up losing 2/3 of its army in the Soviet Union. They lost, and as a result of that, they tried to seek an exit out of the war. They tried to reach out to the Americans, to the British. They would not, however, negotiate with the Soviets.
Yes.
What was that experience? Well, and also this built up opposition within Romania wanting to get out of the war, and there was people that were wanting Antonescu out of power, and they were calling for King Michael to act they were calling for King Michael to act against Antonescu. And was that a confidence builder for King Michael?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, he was basically forced out of the country, and then he had to build up his alliances, but he couldn't come back to someone didn't want him.
Right.
So as opposition built up to Antonescu and there was a growing support of King Michael, he found it a way to get back into the country, to gain support, to eventually overthrow Antonescu. But you can't, in a time of war, people are very, very afraid. And
Right.
they're going to, a lot of time, support the person that's going to protect their best interest. Keep them safe, keep them fed, keep their children safe. So, and with a country that you're having such a huge power struggle in,
Yep.
that can change on a dime, as Romania is a fantastic example of. They flip-flopped a lot, quite a bit.
Yes.
So once King Michael found a way to get back in there and re-established himself as the leader of Romania, and then tried to re-establish the country itself as an allied power.
King Michael did do business with the Soviet Union, because the Soviet Union was coming into Romania on their doorstep. There had to be a lot of fear going into the Soviets, were pretty much had crushed Romania's army at this point. And there had to be a lot of fear from the Romanian public about what the Soviets were going to do. And then you have King Michael doing business with the Soviet Union, with the Soviets going to recognize King Michael as the legitimate ruler of Romania. What was that experience like for the Romanian person?
Well, they can feel it's a mix. They probably felt betrayed. A lot of them. They're like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? We want to shut that door. These people aren't allowed here, and you're opening up trade routes with them. From a diplomatic standpoint, opening trade can sometimes be a way for peace.
Right.
And as the oil fields, again, are a perfect example of, with Germany and what have you, is even remaining neutral, keeping an open trade route and keeping on good terms with the country, especially one that can demolish your country in, snap of a finger. That what may have been what Michael thought was the best route to take to keep Romania whole. The people, on the other hand, wanted nothing to do with the Soviet Union.
Right.
And so they felt like this was a bit of a betrayal to them. And they it caused a drop in support for King Michael. But again, it was a really touchy time.
Right.
So there was a lot of powers that were going back and forth.
Also, it seemed that Romania, also under Antonescu, was also seeking an armistice with the Allies, but the United States and Britain would not necessarily talk to them, especially following the German occupation of Hungary, and the promise Hitler had that Romania would regain Transylvania, but also the Soviets were also promising Romania, under King Michael, Transylvania back from Germany and from Hungary. And so it seemed like, nonetheless, Romania was going to get Transylvania back.
Yeah, that was a big thing, to get Transylvania back. But this again comes down to being that country where you're punished if you don't do what someone wants you to do, or you're punished if you do. So you're
punish if you do or don't.
Yeah, so they could ally themselves with this country and get it back, with this country and get it back, but if they ally themselves with the Nazis or the Soviet Unions, they're against the Allied powers. So in the process, the Pulaski oil fields are getting bombed by the Allies this whole time.
Right.
So it's, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Right. That's what it was.
It's just like, so it's an exhausting position to be in. So they wanted to be allied with the Allies.
Right. That was the preference.
But they're still stuck here, and America was not in the war.
No, they were in the war at this point.
Oh,
They were in the...
yeah, that's true. I'm
Nens
sorry.
Point.
I'm
No,
just
you're
mixing
worried.
my dates up
No
here a little
worries.
there.
No worries.
So, but there's still only so much support that they can get
Right.
from America, especially being, all the way to the east of Europe when a lot
But
of
the United States was also allied with the Soviet Union. They were having Romania, they were encouraging Romania make peace with the Soviets, and that was something that they didn't want to do.
Yeah. So it was a tough spot, a very tough spot.
Yes.
So, to be with the Allies and have to align with their enemies, or it was friends were enemies, enemies
Right.
were friends.
King Michael's coup. I want to talk about King Michael's coup. 1944, obviously we talked about the Soviets who were under Operation Bagration. Romania was certainly part of that operation. There was a coup to throw Antonescu out of power. And King Michael had the strength to overthrow Antonescu. Romania turned on Germany,
Yes.
declared war on Germany.
Yep.
The Nazis ended up bombing Bucharest as a result.
Yep.
And what was your take on all of that?
Well, that comes down to King Michael trying to do what he felt was the right thing. And in a situation where, we talked about, you can do no right, you can do no
Right.
wrong. So he felt the best interest was to ally himself with the Allies.
And ultimately that included the Soviet Union, sadly.
Yeah, and then there's punishments for that. But, you sit there and you hope you can get some support from that as well. So it very much angered Germany.
Yes, as we saw.
At this point, Romania had about 1 million troops that were, ready to stand guard and protect the country. And they kicked out about, I believe, 50,000 German troops.
Yep.
They sent away the ambassador, if you
Yeah.
will, and Germany was just like aghast, but they saw this coup as reversible.
Right.
They were offended. But they didn't take it seriously because this child.
But
came.
also Germany was also in a position of weakness as well, because you had the D-Day invasion happening. Germany was fighting multiple wars on both fronts. Also, they were not as much focusing on the war. They wanted to, quote, win the Jewish war, which was the annihilation of the Jews, sadly. And it felt like, it was a great time for Romania to kick out the Germans and ultimately get Transylvania back from Germany and from Hungary. And that was very much important to Romania, that the Romanians get Transylvania back.
That is a really great point. Like you were talking about the timing and everything. That just as the Germans are getting weakened, and this one time that King Michael's like, "Oh, I have my chance. I can do this."
Yeah.
He's like, "Okay, now we're with the Allies."
Yeah.
And so that's a very good point.
And then, so now we have Romania now was able to get its territory back after World War II ended. And now Romania is effectively under Soviet occupation. They allowed King Michael to rule until, I believe, 1947.
Yeah, they called King Michael a puppet king. Or a lot of people did, and a lot of people still do. Michael did everything he could, but in his position, there's only so much. So, and the Soviets did have quite a bit of influence until they finally did invade and forced King Michael to abdicate by taking 1,000 college students, pointing a gun at their head, and telling him, "Get out, or we're going to kill them," which absolutely broke his heart. But, he wasn't going to let those students die.
Right. It began the Soviet occupation of Romania that would go until 1989, following the overthrow of Ceausescu and Nicolae Ceausescu. And was King Michael ever allowed back into the country?
He was, actually. recently, I want to say in the last like 10 or 15 years, he was back in. He did pass away.
He did pass away
a few
in
months
December.
ago.
December of
Yeah,
2017.
so it was. That's a big day of mourning for
Yes.
the Romanian country, as well, my family.
How do you think King Carroll and King Michael are both remembered in Romania?
King Michael, I believe, is remembered, as far as I know, quite favorably. Like I said, there is people that do still think that he was more of a puppet king, but I don't believe anyone felt that he had bad intentions. His hands may have been tied in a lot of situations, but he did care greatly for his people. From what my great-grandmother would tell me, sometimes we get these ideas about royalty is not taking their job as a leader of a country as seriously because they're born into it, they're just given it, they're not elected. And sometimes that is the case. But from my great-grandmother, King Michael, it was a duty. This was your job. This is what you were born into. And this is your first job. And it's to make sure that your people are well taken care of. And I think that's where King Michael's heart was, and I feel like a lot of people felt that way too. I've even talked to a lot of Romanians that I've met in America who actually are monarchists, which surprises me. Even coming from that family, I'm happy to be in a democracy and whatnot. But it does still at the same time speak very highly of that family and how much they cared for their people, how much they sacrificed for their people. So I mean, I know I'm most familiar with my great-grandmother's story through this. She wrote this wonderful book. It's called I Live Again. It's not in print anymore, but it's a wonderful story of her life and before, right at about the end of World War I, but it mostly centers around her life between Austria and mostly in Romania during World War II. She founded a hospital, and she wrote another book called Hospital of the Queen's Heart that was all about Queen Marie's. It was built around Queen Marie's heart. And her whole experience with both the Nazis and the Soviets. So I felt that, like, just growing up with those stories was really enlightening, but you can always tell that she cared so much for her people. She could have run away and lived the life of, the rich and famous and been very safe, but instead she used all of her resources, raised 6 children, took care of all the soldiers, put 900 care packages together within like a short time span. She built a hospital, she worked in that hospital, became a nurse so she could care for her people.
That's unbelievable. So
in King Michael, she was very close with King Michael, and he felt the same way. So when it comes down to, your question of how he was viewed, I believe he was viewed with more reverence than King Carroll would have been. He kind of ducked out when pressure got too high. He did what he could during that time, but it was a
difficult time in Romanian history.
It was a very difficult time in Romanian history.
What's your take about history books not covering Romania as much as they have until recently?
Oh, I think it's Romania gets forgotten on a lot of fronts. One thing people don't know that it's a romantic language with French and Spanish, Italian. They think because it's closer to the Slavic countries that it's actually more Slavic, but it's not. So everyone's always, there's like they're like, oh, Romanian? Yeah. So, but Romania was such, like, everyone was fighting over this country. Like, right here in the corner.
The oil fields.
Yeah, the oil fields made such a big part. And the pickle that they were in, the bind, it being stuck in between all of this. And how much their little country, them allowing the use of the oil fields, how much the oil fields helped or hurt when it was taken away. They were such an anchor to whomever they were allied with at the time. So I do appreciate them covering Romania more and more, and as more things are coming out, to see what a big role that this little country played in this war.
Because there's so much history about Romania. It's unbelievable that was blocked out because of the Soviet occupation, and that so much is now coming out about Romania. It's just unbelievable. I encourage people to cover Romania.
Yeah, well, when the Soviets would come in, they
erased all the history.
They erased everything.
Yeah.
They would rewrite it, and to the history go the victors.
Right.
So
Victors
that always does play a part. But as Romania is now allowed to regain its identity and rebuilding itself and growing, it's able to further cement its role in history. And I think that's really great. And I'm enjoying watching it grow as it has been. My family was actually just there November.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
that had to be fun.
Yeah,
Did they visit Bucharest?
They were at Castlebran, actually.
Oh, nice.
My great uncle was having his birthday there.
Oh, that's...
So my dad and my uncles and aunts went all out there, and they came back with tons of pictures. They had an amazing time. It was beautiful.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Saygan, for coming on.
Thank you so much.
You.
This was such a great opportunity.
Thank you for coming on, Saygan. Thank you so very, very much. Anytime. You're more than welcome to come on anytime.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. That's all. Well, that'll do it for this episode of History Now. See you soon, Lake Orion. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon.